question that never left me. I've lived long enough to see kingdoms rise and fall. Not the kind you read about in books, but the kingdoms built inside people. The kind made of pride, ambition, control, and eventually regret. And through all those shifting seasons, one question has never stopped echoing in me. Do you hear the voice of God? Not did you once. Not do you believe in him. Not do you pray. But this, do you still hear him? I was 17 the first time I felt that question burn in my chest like it was stitched into my bones. I hadn't been looking for God. I had been flipping through television channels, killing time like most teenagers did back then. But something happened. The screen in front of me didn't go black, but my attention did. Everything else fell away. There, on the edge of a dusty table in our home, was a Bible, a forgotten gift from my uncle to my mother. I had seen it 100 times and never cared. That night, I was pulled toward it like gravity was suddenly moral, like holiness had weight. I picked it up, opened it. I don't remember the passage. I couldn't quote a verse from it that moment. But I do remember this. My skin trembled like an instrument strung too tight. And even though no sound filled the room, I knew someone had entered it. Not with footsteps, not with wind, but with presence. A presence that didn't shout but changed the shape of the room. And me. That was the night I stopped asking if God was real, but I started asking something far more dangerous. How do I know when it's him speaking? Because once you believe he speaks, you can't afford to ignore his voice. And so, I ask you, not out of religion or performance, but from one soul to another, do you hear him? When was the last time you truly heard his voice, and how did you respond? When the television froze and heaven stirred. It started with something so small I could have missed it. A flicker on the TV screen. I was lounging on a couch that had seen too many winters, legs over the armrest, remote in hand. Static buzzed for a second, and just like that, everything stopped. The noise, the movement, even the thoughts in my head. The screen didn't go black. It froze like time itself blinked. And in that strange stillness, something shifted inside me. My eyes wandered not out of boredom, but out of a nudge I couldn't explain. They landed on the Bible, still gathering dust, still resting quietly at the corner of the table like it had been waiting for this very moment. I'd ignored it for years. I'd laughed when my mom asked me to read it. I'd passed by it like it meant nothing. But that night, it wasn't just a book. It felt like a door. I reached for it. Not with reverence, not with understanding, just with something honest. Hunger, maybe? Desperation I didn't even know I carried. I opened to a random page. I don't remember the words I saw, but I remember how my chest tightened. Like something ancient had stepped into the room. Like I was no longer alone. There was no thunder, no vision, no voice from the clouds. Just the weight of being seen, deeply and entirely for the first time in my life. I turned off the TV, sat in silence, and I whispered a sentence I had never said before, not even to myself. Jesus, if you're real, I'll follow you. No theatrics. No altar call. Just a boy, a book, and something eternal leaning in. I didn't tell anyone that night. It felt too fragile, too sacred. Like speaking it out loud might shatter what had just begun. But something had changed. Something permanent. It was the night I stopped pretending God was a theory and started living like he was a person. A stranger with my name. I used to think faith was something you inherited, like your last name or the shape of your nose. You were born into it or you weren't. But then I heard my name in a way I had never heard it before. Not with ears, with my soul. There's a line in the Gospel of John that says the shepherd calls his sheep by name. I had read it, skimmed it really. It sounded poetic, something from a painting or a stained glass window. But then one day I realized it wasn't poetry. It was precision. He wasn't calling everyone. He was calling me. My name, the same one that teachers mispronounced and government forms reduced to a number, was spoken by someone who didn't ask me to prove anything. Someone who didn't call based on what I had done. But because I belonged, I didn't feel worthy. At that point in life, I had more questions than answers. More doubts than faith. I carried guilt that hadn't even been named yet. And still, the call came. Quiet. Undeniable. Clearer than thunder, though it made no sound. A stranger knew me, but he wasn't a stranger to me anymore. I found myself responding in ways I couldn't explain. Saying yes to things before I understood them. Walking away from comforts I used to crave. Speaking to a God I barely knew as if he had always been there. Because deep down, I think he had. And now every time I hear that scripture, he calls his sheep by name, it's not a metaphor to me. It's a memory. They said it was over. They said it was over. Quietly, carefully, as if softer words could make death more polite. My daughter was limp in my mother-in-law's arms. Eyes closed, lips pale, no sound, no breath. I stood there watching the room close in like it couldn't bear to hold us all. She's gone, they whispered. My wife collapsed into the next room, unable to look. I understood. A parent isn't built to witness that. The body can endure 1,000 wounds, but not that one. But I didn't leave. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. Something deeper rose in me, not rage, not despair, but a fire that demanded one more moment. One more. I dropped to my knees beside her. I didn't pray because I was righteous. I prayed because I was ruined. God, it wasn't eloquent. It wasn't poetic. Just a man begging. And then it happened. Not in my head. Not in my heart. But out loud. A voice. Not mine. Not anyone in that room. It didn't thunder. It didn't shake the walls. But it pierced everything in me like steel through silence. Lay your hands on her and ask. The words came slow like a procession. Royal. Measured. Final. I obeyed without thinking. My palms met her skin. Still cold. And then. Warmth. Color. Breath. She gasped like someone rising out of deep water. Her little eyes opened, confused but alive. She looked around the room, then locked on mine like we had both returned from somewhere else. 15 minutes. That's how long she hadn't moved. 15 minutes. And now she was back. I didn't shout. I didn't dance. I held her. That was all. They said it was over. But heaven had not spoken yet. And when God speaks, even death has to make room. The first thought wins. I once asked an old believer how to know if it was God speaking. She didn't hesitate. Her eyes narrowed like she was about to hand over something fragile. When your mind is still, the first thought is His. The second is fear, the third is doubt, and after that, it's just noise. I didn't understand it at first. I was too young, too eager to explain away every quiet prompting with logic, with schedules, with other people's approval. But life has a way of proving things true. There was a time I sat in church and felt a sudden nudge, give that man money. Now, I looked at him, tired coat, downcast eyes, and then my own voice barged in. What if he doesn't need it? What if it's awkward? What if I'm wrong? And I didn't do it. Later, I watched someone else walk over, hand him a bill, and saw that man crumble in tears. He had just told God, silently, if you see me, send help today. I was supposed to be the answer, but I'd let the second thought win. Since then, I've learned God rarely argues. He invites. And if you ignore him, he doesn't shout over you, he just waits. His voice doesn't compete with ours. It precedes it, like a morning breeze before the city wakes up, like a key turned quietly before the door creaks open. That first thought, the one that feels too kind, too bold, too sudden to be your own, that's often him. And when you obey it, the world shifts. Just a little, but enough to know you heard right. 83 children, one shepherd. They didn't come all at once, or with warning. It began with one child, then another, then a few more, each with eyes that carried more questions than their mouths could ask. Children whose names had been lost in paperwork, whose birthdays no one celebrated, whose tears didn't register on anyone's schedule. And somehow God whispered, they're yours. I argued. I reminded him that I had no money, no space, no blueprint for any of this. I reminded him I was already a father, already tired, already stretched. But the whisper didn't go away. Instead, it turned into a sentence I couldn't unhear, start the home. No thunder, no angel with a scroll, just obedience with a price tag. And me standing on a line that separated logic from faith. So we did it. We opened our doors, not because we had room, but because love made space where there was none. Over 20 years, we took in 83 children, 83 stories, 83 chances to say yes when it would have been easier to say no. There were nights I sat awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how we'd pay for food in the morning. Days when paperwork piled higher than my faith. Moments I wanted to quit when doubt felt louder than calling. But then I'd see them sitting at a table laughing like nothing had ever been broken in them. And I knew this was holy ground, not because we built something perfect, but because we built it in obedience. God never promised me comfort, but he gave me clarity. If I send them to you, I'll care for them through you. And he did. Every meal, every bed, every breakthrough. People look at me and say, that's amazing. You must be so strong. They don't see the cracks, the cost, The inner wrestling that comes with saying yes to God when you want to say no. But I wasn't strong. I was just held. 83 children walked through those doors. But there was always only one shepherd. And it wasn't me. When the voice goes silent, there came a season when heaven seemed closed. Not angry, just absent. I'd pray and my words felt like smoke rising into nothing. I'd open scripture, but the pages felt dry. Familiar, but far away. I kept showing up to church, to the orphanage, to my knees, but something was missing. The voice. The one that had once stirred my soul in the middle of the night. The one that told me to stay, to go, to give, to trust. The one that once woke me with clarity was now quiet. I started asking myself the questions no one wants to admit. Did I do something wrong? Is he angry with me? Was that all just emotion? I smiled in front of others. I served. I preached. But inside, I felt like a well that had run dry. My prayers turned from declarations to groans. I wasn't looking for miracles, I was looking for presence. Some nights, I'd walk outside just to stare at the sky and whisper, say something. Anything. And still, silence. That's the ache no one preaches about when God is still near but chooses not to speak. But over time, I began to understand something. Silence is not absence. Sometimes a teacher stops speaking during a test. Sometimes a shepherd watches from a distance to see if the sheep still follow. He hadn't abandoned me. He was trusting me. Because the voice that once told me where to go had already taught me who to be. And in the quiet, he was shaping something deeper than answers. He was shaping trust. Still, he speaks. The silence didn't end with a thunderclap. There was no breakthrough moment on a mountaintop. No dramatic revival meeting. Just a morning like any other, dishes in the sink, papers on the desk, voices of children somewhere in the background. And then, in the middle of it all, a whisper inside me rose again. Not loud, not urgent, but unmistakable. You're still mine. 3 words. But they cut through months of silence like sunlight through curtains. I didn't cry right away. I didn't fall to my knees. I just stood still, afraid that if I moved too quickly, the moment might vanish. But it didn't. It stayed. I went back to prayer not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I opened scripture not as a habit, but as a hunger. And his voice returned, not like it had before, not always with clarity or volume. But it came with peace. A steady warmth. Like a friend sitting beside you, saying nothing, but being everything. Obedience started to feel like worship again. Not duty. Delight. I began noticing his presence in the in-between moments, the unglamorous ones. Folding laundry, driving the van, tying a child's shoes. Suddenly, even these became sacred. That's when I realized the silence wasn't punishment. It was preparation. God wasn't gone. He was growing something in me, something stronger than emotion, something deeper than signs. He was teaching me to walk by trust, not just by sound. And even when I couldn't hear him, he was still speaking, through everything I'd already heard. Finale, one voice, one choice. He doesn't shout. He never has to. When the world screams for attention, God often speaks in a tone only the surrendered can hear. Not because he's hiding, but because he's holy. And now the question comes back again like it always does. Do you hear him? Not just in the songs or the sermons or the sacred buildings, but in your decisions, in your delays, in your doubts. When you're alone and no one is watching, do you still hear the shepherd's voice? If you do, follow. If you don't, ask. He knows how to call your name, because at the end of everything, there's only one voice that matters, and only one choice. Will you listen and obey? If this touched your heart, help share this. Like, comment, subscribe, not for numbers, but so this message reaches someone else who needs it.